Nowadays, pretty much everybody knows who the Avengers are, but if you've never read one of the comics before, then this is a video for you. Woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Kicking this list off, I'm going to go with the new Avengers by Michael Bendis. It's kind of a tradition on my Where to Start series that I always start off the list with the first title that I ever read for that team or character. Sure, this isn't the traditional team that you're probably used to. You have got some familiar faces there like Captain America and Iron Man, and admittedly you may be looking for the freshest starting point that you can find, but this has got some continuity that's hanging over it. But the best thing about this run is something that continues throughout it, is that whatever's going on in the rest of the Marvel universe, this just rolls with it. Whether that be Civil War, Secret Invasion, Dark Reign, or even Siege, which is quite fortunate because Michael Bendis wrote most of them. This also ties into concepts like the Illuminati and is a perfect jumping on point if you also wanted to know a lot about the Marvel universe. But I didn't know a lot about what was going on in the 616 universe before I started reading this, but because I enjoyed the story so much and seeing all these different characters interact with each other, it made me want to learn about what's going on, and in all honesty, I'd rather give you a starting point that maybe does have a bit of baggage hanging over it than something that's a clean start but will bore you throughout. Next up, and a perfect recommendation if you want a long run featuring that classic team, is going to be the Avengers by Kurt Busiek and George Perez. I read this sort of the backwards way round because I started with Avengers Forever, and then after years passed they finally printed some omnibuses, so I managed to jump into this, and I think that this is absolutely textbook. And beyond just the 4 core Avengers members, there's so many different characters that feature throughout this. There's so many different storylines that go on. The Ultron one is probably my highlight of this, but regardless, this is a perfect jumping on point, and I also think the backstory of the series itself is really interesting. It's something that I touched on when I did my George Perez top 5 notable works, so I definitely recommend checking that out. The art is phenomenal and it gives respect to every character that's featured in the frame. It's big and fun and action packed, but at the same time it takes itself seriously, and I just think this is a perfect jumping on point if you want a classic Avengers story. And fair warning to the purists, because I always offend somebody when I do a Where to Start series, there are many great jumping on points that feature Avengers teams that aren't just Captain America, Iron Man, Thor and Hulk. And to exemplify that, I'm gonna go with the Young Avengers. The Alan Heinberg run was very influential to me when I was first getting into comics, and I also think the Kieran Gillen run's great as well. But you might think that just because it says Young Avengers, it's not something that would be great for an older reader, but in all honesty, this is probably some of the best Avengers stories that I've ever read. And beyond just that, it also ties into the regular Avengers team. They do feature throughout this. It's not just the kids Avengers, which is what I feel like this often gets mislabeled as. Every character's got their own story, there's ones involving drug use, there's also wacky time traveling concepts, and it also builds into a crescendo with the Children's Crusade. So if you did want an easier way to learn about the Avengers without just jumping straight into one of their titles, I think this would be a fantastic option. But maybe you don't want something that's set in the main Marvel universe, and I know some people hate this and they take every single opportunity to remind you of it, but it might be worth checking out Mark Millar's The Ultimates. Now yes, he did do some disservice when it came to the Hulk and also characters like Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, and that's what everybody likes to remember about this run, but if you go back and read it now, there is still some good aspects about it. It is set in the modern day and also gave us Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury. Captain America's more of a grumpy old man, and Thor is this character that nobody actually believes that he's a god. And especially in the early 2000s when this was coming out, the Avengers weren't really a big known commodity. Sure, they were in the comic community, but it's nothing like it was today. So for a new reader like myself who had read a few issues of the new Avengers but also wanted a bit more context to who these characters actually were, it did allow me to get a bit of background knowledge even if I couldn't transfer everything into the modern 616 universe. It's also very action packed with great art from Brian Hitch, and I think people like hating this just because of the fact that it's the Ultimate Universe, but there's still a lot of good stuff in here and it's not going to take a long time to read it. And maybe you like the sound of that, but you know that you don't want to read something from the early 2000s, in which case I would definitely recommend The Ultimates by Al Ewing. And this is one of those titles that in retrospect I missed out from my Where to Start Black Panther video, because this isn't the traditional Avengers or even Ultimates team. You have got characters like Black Panther and Captain Marvel leading the charge, which is a bit of a different change of pace. But if you wanted something with more of a cosmic sci-fi twist, then I definitely think this would be the one for you. I also think it's massively underrated. That complete collection went out of print way too quickly and I never got a chance to get it. So hopefully Marvel does some kind of follow-up omnibus including Hickman's run as well, but maybe you know you don't want to start with the traditional team, in which case I do think this would be a great recommendation. Following on from that logic, I'm going to go with the Savage Avengers. This is a very recent title that doesn't expect you you to know a lot about what was going on in Marvel beforehand, and it's more in line with something like the Dark Avengers because you've got characters like Venom and the Punisher and Elektra and even Conan the Barbarian, so this really isn't your traditional Avengers, but at the same time I do think it's a great story. You get to see these characters that you used to see working alone, being part of a team, and in a weird way they form this bond that feels like it should have been established years ago. And their missions often centre around the occult and mysticism, so don't be too surprised if Doctor Strange appears in a couple of issues, or even starts leading the team. And I often save this for the end of my where to start videos, but admittedly I don't think too many people watch up to there, but there's no such thing as a wrong way to get into comics. So even though this is the Avengers and you're probably used to seeing certain characters that aren't the ones that you see in Savage Avengers, if that's a story that's going to interest you enough to want to explore beyond that and connect the dots that it leaves along the way, then that is the right place for you to jump on with. And it's great as well because this run has already got an omnibus solicited, which you can already order from the channel sponsor, Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOFWOOF you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOFWOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below and you can use these codes as many times as you like. But maybe you do want something that's a traditional Avengers team and an origin story, and you also don't want to read about 60 issues of a run? Well, you're in luck because in the early 2010s, Marvel did a series of original graphic novels that were just called Season 1, and they did one for Earth's Mightiest Heroes that was written by Peter David. So you've got one of the biggest names in comics writing this, and there was also a variety of artists. But this reminds me a lot of the first Avengers movie because you'll get to see when Thor and Captain America and Hulk and Iron Man met for the first time, and as is the rule in comics, they fought each other. And it's also weirdly told from the perspective of Loki, but you get to see them working together, going against the first couple of enemies. And I don't really think this is going to blow your mind or tell you anything that you might not know if you've already seen the movies, but if you want a comic version of that so that you can get introduced to these characters in a different way, then this would be for you. But if you want something from an earlier era rather than a modern adaptation, I'd definitely recommend checking out a couple of issues of the run that was done by Roger Stern. He started this in the 70s and went on for years and years on end. Now, full disclaimer, I haven't read every issue from this run, mostly because of the fact that there was just so many of them. But there was one story that I read years ago where it was about Kang and it had this alternate universe version of the Avengers, and that story in particular is one that really stuck with me, and I know over the years I've read a few other issues throughout this, and I just love Roger Stern's storytelling. He's got a way of making it feel modern even though it was during that classic era. So it might be worth hunting down a few issues of this. It was very influential. It even gave birth to the West Coast Avengers, although not physically. Speaking of which, I'm going to recommend the West Coast Avengers. Now, you had a plethora of great writers working on this throughout its run. You had Steve Englehart, like I said, you had Roger Stern, you also had John Byrne, and this took place during the 80s in LA, so if you wanted something with a bit of a change of location because you're sick and tired of seeing New York, then this might be worth checking out. It's also an Avengers team that's led by Hawkeye, so that's quite a different change, and you've also got lesser known characters really getting the spotlight in this run, like Wonder Man and Mockingbird, and also Rhodey as Iron Man. This was also very much that era where each issue was pretty much a contained story, but there was a growing storyline over the course of it that made reading each issue feel rewarding. But if you can get your hands on this, maybe through something like the Marvel Unlimited app, then I'd definitely recommend checking it out. Now, like I've said before, I don't really like recommending too many older titles because of the fact that I'm always approaching this as if I was a new reader, but the earliest that I'll probably go for the Avengers is going to be the Kree-Skrull War, and because it shouldn't really take a genius to work out that if you wanted to start at the beginning with Stan Lee that you can, because that was the very beginning of the team. But the Kree-Skrull War for me is really interesting because I feel like this is the first time that the Avengers really had a sequential story. Sure, there might be other examples, but this is where it felt like there was a clear beginning, middle and end to one of these arcs. It's only 8 issues long and it was written by the legendary Roy Thomas. You've also got art from Neil Adams and all the Buscemi's. I only read this because it was free on one of the Marvel apps a few years ago, but I read this and it was fantastic. It still holds up today despite the fact that it has got that Silver Age way of telling stories, and by that I mean that just everybody narrates everything that they do. But there was huge development for the team here, and there was such a wide scope that you didn't really see in comics that often back then, except for maybe in the Fantastic Four. And even though it feels a bit dated now, I still feel like this was ahead of its time, which is why it's going to get a spot on this list. However, you might want a more modern, lengthy story, in which case you're probably going to get no better than the run that was done by Jonathan Hickman. But this went on for years and pretty much led the charge for Marvel Comics. It's very easy to jump in at the beginning, even though you would need to know a little bit about the characters, and it's not afraid of throwing big complex plots at you, so if you do want a more sci-fi based story, then this would be a great shout. It also introduces a separate team of new Avengers, and they all come to a head when it gets to Secret Wars, and I feel like this was a run that knew who everybody's favourite characters were and they just put them all in the same book. And Jonathan Hickman is one of those writers that can sometimes fall a bit too love in some of his own concepts, but I feel like he reined it in perfectly when it came to the Avengers. Avengers. So if you want something that is kind of going to introduce you, but at the same time not hold your hand the entire way through it, then this would definitely be the one for you. Another series that came out in a similar era is going to be the Uncanny Avengers. Now let's see if I get my continuity right, because after Avengers vs X-Men, there was a split in the team so that some of the X-Men members ended up working for the Avengers. So you get some really interesting and unlikely character moments like Captain America working alongside Havoc, and it was written by Rick Remender. It does require you to know a little bit of continuity, but the thing is, continuity is something that's always going to be there. So if you already know that you like the X-Men, then why not jump into this, because you've already got those characters that you might be familiar with. That's how a lot of people get into different comic series. You might follow one character and then see them in a different title, and that's no different here. So if you wanted to get into the Avengers by proxy, then this would probably be a great shout. Speaking of which, and this might be a cheat, but I'm just going to go with Event Comics. Normally I put this on a where to start list, but I'll give one specific recommendation. But when it comes to the Avengers, they're just involved in so many of these. So if you wanted to see the Avengers separate, you could read Avengers Disassembled. If you wanted to see them separate again, you could read Civil War. If you wanted to see them get back together, you could read Siege. If you wanted to see them fight another Marvel team, you could read Avengers vs X-Men. If you know you like Event Comics and you want to be thrown into the middle of the mess, there's some great titles that you could read for the Avengers. Not all of them are probably going to have the best representation of those characters in them, but at the same time, reading comics is about having fun. Even something like Secret Invasion might be a good shout, even though it does need you to know a little bit about what was going on before. Last couple now, and I'm going to go with the Avengers The Initiative. Again, you would need to know about what happened during Civil War, but there were so many splits in teams after that there's just so many great jumping on points. This is no exception, because S.H.I.E.L.D. decided that they wanted to have an Avengers unit pretty much in every state across America. Thanks again for looking out for the other countries. So this effectively became like an Avengers school title. And if you want to see how they train different people up, all these different missions that they can go on, and just read a storied run that went on for quite a few issues, then this might be a really good shout for you. You're not going to see a lot of the original Avengers, but if you want a bit of a different take on it, then I'd recommend this. And that's going to be my honourable mention, pretty much any Avengers title that you actually want to read. A lot of people who are still reading comics today didn't start at an issue 1 or a fresh jumping on point, they just jumped in. So who knows, have a look at some covers, there might be one that really takes your interest, and that would be the perfect jumping on point for you. I haven't read every single Avengers title that exists, so I can't include absolutely everything in this video, but my last pick that I would honestly recommend is pretty much any Avengers title that was coming out in the 2010s. This was when Michael Bendis was absolutely on fire, so you had stuff like the Secret Avengers, the Mighty Avengers, the New Avengers, the Dark Avengers, Avengers Academy, and there was just so many different titles. All of these felt like a unique jumping on point that all had a different tone that they were going for. So if you like spy espionage thrillers, why not go for the Secret Avengers? If you like something heroic and classic, then the Mighty one might be the one for you. And if you want to follow the villains, then the Dark Avengers would be a great option. And if you don't have a clue who they are, then definitely check out the video that I made. But that just illustrates my point that there's so many different titles that you'd have to have a little bit of a look into each of them to see which one you'd really like to read. And if you really want to experience what it was like at that time, you could read them in order of release. But there are definitely some hidden gems during this era that are worth checking out. But that's the video, and I've had to film this in the hour that I've got free before I start work, so if it's felt rushed, that's the reason why. But until next time, just make sure that you stay safe and stay mad, all you dogs. Woof woof. See you at the next video.